These guys were fashionably undead before it was fashionable to be undead. Your brain may have long since rotted, but that won't stop them from eating it. Just a few chops should do them in. Be careful not to miss. Oh, that would be embarrassing. Dan's #1 fans. They can't afford to lend a hand, but they'll follow you to the ends of the earth, or at least to the end of the graveyard. These guardian gargoyles aren't much for conversation, and don't ask to hear their singing voice, unless you're into rock and roll. Ba-doom-tsh. Have you ever had one of those days where you leave the house full of breezy purpose, only to realize that you've left something really important at home? Well, that's how these guys feel all the time. Back in King Peregrine's day, imps were often kept as household servants. Sadly, those were cruel times, and many imps were treated very poorly by their masters. Really, it was no surprise when these cunning little creatures formed a secret alliance with Xerox. On the morning of the Battle of Gallowmere, every last one of King Peregrine's men awoke to find his house imp gone, and along with them every last undergarment in the kingdom. Never before had an army's charge been so devastatingly broken before battle had even begun. Isn't nature wonderful? This beautiful family of wolves has found a happy home in the graveyard. Back in their den, 6 cute, squirmy little pups are waiting for good old Mom and Pop to return with delicious, fresh meat. Well, perhaps graveyard meat isn't the most fresh, but at least it's easily found and safe. But let me tell you, elsewhere in Gallowmere, vengeful farmers have hunted these majestic beasts to the point of extinction. Oh, thank goodness this last happy little family is here, amid the peace and tranquility of the graveyard, where absolutely no harm can befall them. These straw men spin to win. They have teamed up with the crows to protect their cornfield home from strangers, whom they greet with sharp, spinning affection. Nothing comes easy for these poor farmers. As Gallomere's population declines, so does the demand for their crops. It's no wonder they hide in haystacks. Show them some sympathy and let them stab you a couple of times, eh? Industrious thieving imps built these powerful machines to steal crops from the farmers. Personally, I think they do better mass-producing these things and selling them to the farmers, but hey, thieves gotta thieve. These dreaded cornstalkers are utterly silent, totally invisible, and 100% deadly. They're also just about the cheapest solution a time-strapped video game developer could ever conceive to stop the player going where they're not wanted. Rejoice. They're vampire bats. Actually, they're just bats, but they bite. That's sort of vampire-y. These once good-natured pumpkins fell victim to the Pumpkin King's toxic influence. They're still tasty, if you can convince them not to murder you. But perhaps you should think about things from their perspective. Well, how would you feel if someone wanted to scoop out your brains and carve a big, goofy smile across your face? Fresh off the vine, these baby boomers are in too much of a hurry to grow up. They can't wait to spread their pumpkin seed. These rats seem harmless, but they have tiny fingers, and they're probably plotting something terrible. Each rat you squish is an act of treason against the mighty Rat King Derek. Hypnotized citizens of a once thriving town. They'll happily invite you in for tea, but if they ask to borrow a shovel, you should probably decline. Xerox Mechanical Goon Squad, developed deep in the City of Madness, although manufactured in China, of course. That coal in their stomach fuels them, whilst also cooking up a mean brisket. Disciples of the head monk, these men of the cloth have been driven mad by the disappearance of their master, and Jack's incessant ramblings. The harsh chime of a bell tells them an unwelcome guest has arrived, or that it's time for dinner. Perhaps both. People seldom consider how hard it is to trim a sentient shrub, not least the fire-breathing types who would just as soon set themselves ablaze as play understudy in your latest topiary production. No, gardeners in Gallowmere do not get enough credit. With the disappearance of the head monk, these patients have been left to run amok. We don't know exactly what it was that sent them raving mad. Perhaps it was magic, perhaps the moon, perhaps they were all licking toads. Truly, you should not lick those toads. Is this really what the ancient dragons evolved into? Their dreadful ancestors would be ashamed. Don't lick their backs. That's a good way to end up in the loony bin. No, really, just don't. Poisonous pollen protects these plants from predators. Just to be safe, they fire it at everything. Can never be too careful these days. Some of the most evil, murderous critters ever to blight the land. Thankfully, they were locked away in a hermetically sealed vault by a great hero hundreds of years ago. Don't worry, we're safe. Only a complete fool would ever set them free. Oh, please tell me you didn't. Fascinating creatures, ants. Did you know they're as old as the dinosaurs? That they talk using chemicals? Or that they share a hive mind? And contrary to popular belief, they actually have no interest whatsoever in your pants. The heaviest of infantry and most ill-suited for the Battle of Gallowmere. Many of them fell victim to the deep mud rather than swords or spears. These undead knights are most effective when rolled down hills or launched from catapults. Touchy-feelers of the Swamp Guardian, said to live deep below the water's surface. Though too timid to show his many faces, he still likes to stay in touch. Sometimes he stays in touch too hard. The soil of the ancient battlegrounds, made fertile by the blood of centuries, spits forth the husks of these sorry souls. Their battle should have long since ended, and yet they still march in proud defiance of the living. These crestfallen cravens once fled the battlefield and are now bound to it, doomed to forever relive their greatest moment of shame. And forever is a long time. Tough break. I guess being dead isn't all fun and games. These floundering fiends lure naive fishermen near the water before dragging them screaming into the watery depths. There's no such thing as an easy meal in Gallowmere. Not for humans, at least. Hired muscle. The Guardians of Gallowmere should really shell out more clams for their services. Nevertheless, these barnacles still stick around. These aquatic abnormalities found a home in the sunken town of Mellowmead. Here they spend their days performing ritualistic sacrifices to malevolent elder deity. Perhaps best not to get involved, I'd say. An ill-fated mining expedition by citizens of Mellowmead caused a tragic and brutal retaliation by the Rhinotors. They have since gone into hibernation. Nothing irks them more than being woken up early, and to them, anything before 2 p.m. is early. Have no pity for these fools. They were once Gallowmere's most heinous criminals, as fearsome in life as they are now in death. What a world we live in, where the guilty execute the innocent. These slow-moving busybodies are like so wrapped up in themselves. Once Gallomere's elite, they now walk alongside the common corpses. Death brings everyone together. This mean-spirited snake was always viewed as the lesser serpent's sibling. It was always Kolkatura this and Kolkatura that. Well, if no one wants to worship him, let there be no worshippers at all. These brain-dead bodyguards still defend King Peregrine. Don't tell them of his passing. They would be devastated. Trained in small arms, these knights must throw their weapons due to their small arms. Stone golems were once the hottest ticket in castle security, and King Peregrine was one of the first to purchase a pair for his personal protection. Of course, they say you should always skip the first generation of new tech, and when golems started to stomp all and sundry, the manufacturers were forced to issue a full product recall. Sadly, King Peregrine missed the recall note on account of being dead, and his golems are still guarding, still stomping. These are spineless sea dogs with a penchant for plundering. They never complain, even when... These are spineless sea dogs with a penchant for plundering. They never complain, even when cleaning the poop deck. Obedient to a fault, they won't even revive themselves unless commanded to. The pirate captain's right-hand men, despite their lack of right hands, their main qualification being of no discernible threat to the captain. Time really does fly. These clockwork pests will shave minutes off your life with each sweep of their hands. Staring into their faces will tell you the time of your death. Nothing you don't know already. Exactly what use is a flying eyeball without a flying brain? And without a flying mouth, how can it possibly report what it has seen? I suppose that must be why they simply try to incinerate you instead. These are Xeroc's elite skeletal warriors, trained by Lord Cardok himself. Mortal weapons cannot hurt them. Only a hero's blow can fell such hard-boiled evil, and you, Sir Fortescue, are no hero. At least not quite yet.